Alrighty, we'll get started here in just a moment as we get everything online here. We're going to move the camera a little bit closer than I have in episodes past. Try something a little different here. Let's get the link shared and we'll get started. Oop, oop. And let's get the copy of the stream online. As we see that Kyle Busch has apparently done what was one time unthinkable, scored 200 combined NASCAR victories across the top three series. But the clock, nevertheless, waits for no man. We wait for the results of NASCAR inspection as Kyle is now talking with Fox Sports announcers there on the front straightaway. Nevertheless, we wait for the time to tick down and see what happens going forward. And check out the live stream here. Oop, oop. All right. Okay, I see a couple of you guys in there. Welcome aboard. Good to see. I'm sure this is probably one of the more anticipated episodes of the Disqualification show. Certainly, Kyle Busch's 200th combined win across the top three series. Now will they find anything more or find anything less with his car? But we'll find out as we wait for the results to come in. I'm just glad they didn't get the flag stuck in the wheel like what happened with a lot of those guys at Homestead last year. But let us get started here. Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, it's okay. Loving the picture there of Richard Petty's hat on Kyle Busch. I mean, it's a similar situation to what happened with Jimmy Johnson getting the 7 championships. I mean, when it's an accomplishment that is at the exact same level as as somebody else. Oh, it got deleted. Oh, who would delete that? That's a great picture. Oh, radical. There we go. Sorry, I'm just clicking back and forth here as we get started. So, yeah. Didn't like the race too much, Anthony. Huh? I don't know. I think it seemed like a happy medium between what we had at Las Vegas and what we had at Atlanta. Certainly the end of the race wasn't very good at the end there. You would certainly hope that you get a situation where you have Kyle Busch up there and everybody else getting a better chance at it. But could just be he just had the best car. But who knows what happens on that? Certainly the back of the field was a bit competitive there with such low attrition in the field there. But it's Fontana is definitely a track that's better in person than one you see on TV. I think we've talked about this before. I mean, you can pretty much say that about just about any track that's out there now. But I think what was really a shame was Martin Truex getting that damage from that one lap restart at the end of the stage. I think that was going to be a situation where you could have actually had. I think it would have been interesting to see him and the 18 actually have something happen there at the end. Certainly seeing how Keselowski and Logano raced each other at the finish there. If you had Truex and Busch racing each other that hard, that would have been something interesting to see. And yes, Anthony, at least unofficially here, Bowyer is still listed as the only DNF. I believe it was an engine problem. I know that they reported earlier that he had a dropped cylinder and smoke in the cockpit. I would assume that that's what happened that finally took him out, but I haven't got the official results yet to show the listed cause. But Bowyer, unofficially, his first last place finish since Darlington in 2017, which is a race I attended there. He actually broke down in front of us there on back on pit road, and they took forever to actually get a push truck to actually get him back to his pit stall, and that ultimately knocked him out of contention. But yeah, first time for Bowyer, first time for car number 14 to finish last at Fontana. So a couple of firsts along the way, and but different set of circumstances here. But any other, the race at Fontana, it's kind of hard to sum up there, other than the Kyle Busch's dominance. Um, we see some comers and goers through the pack there. Austin Dillon, I know, was talked a lot about the broadcast there, about him not feeling well, potentially having Cole Custer jump in and drive in relief of him there. Unofficially, a 10th place finish at the end of the show there. Good run for him. I mean, in terms of more underdog drivers, I mean, Matt DiBenedetto had a good run through most of that. It was towards the front of the field during the exchange of pit stops there. Didn't quite lead a lap. It doesn't show it, at least on here, that he'd led a lap, but finishing 18th at the end of the day. A good run for them. So it seems that, again, the Joe Gibbs tide has lifted all boats there for the Toyota teams. Looking further back, it's unfortunate to see Bubba Wallace struggle a lot there too. He was he seemed like he had a slow pit stop or something that would dropped him back into the bottom five about midway through the race, and then ultimately the tire failure that cost him even more time, finishing 30th at the end of the show. And then Daniel Hemrick, again, few tire issues, not as many as we've seen in some other races before, but different set of circumstances there. Joey Gase, Garrett Smithley, BJ McLeod, finishing behind Reed Sorensen in 34th. That's 35th through 37th there in the bottom five. Then, of course, Boyer in the last place. So it wasn't settled until about 45 laps to go. It looked like it was going to be a Joey Gase versus BJ McLeod battle through most of the event, although Garrett Smithley had dropped back into the rear of the field when the race started. 77 car ended up finishing 36th, McLeod 37th, and Boyer in 38th. McLeod's car actually was the only other one before Boyer falling out of the race that actually had spent an extended period of time in the garage area, and that ended up being a different the situation there at the end. So again, it's good. You see this with a lot of these smaller teams. They got to actually dig as hard as they can to kind of keep going there. Just look at it, Joey Logano, not too happy after perhaps after the battle there with Keselowski at the end, but seemed like good hard racing between the two of them. It just didn't work out there, and the 18 took advantage, and that was the end. That was all she wrote there. Oh my goodness, we're not gonna stop hearing about this all week, but it is. I mean, to be fair, it is an accomplishment. I mean, but I think there was somebody that posted this on Twitter the other day and said that Kyle Busch is going for his, he's got 52 Cup wins, which, as everybody knows, is one away from 200, and I thought that's a perfect way to sum that all up. Say what you will about Richard Petty and not having as many as many large fields that they had to compete with. I mean, okay, yeah, they weren't the average Cup race from 1958 to 1992 wasn't a race that had 38 to 40 cars in it all the time, and but at the same time, if you really think about it here with Kyle Busch's thing in the Xfinity and the Truck Series, certainly the issue is you don't want to have a whole lot of these guys in there that are competing against drivers that are trying to make names for themselves in the lower series. And I'm actually gonna turn that off right now. But it's because what you have is it's like I know that some of the Xfinity drivers have talked about, been really aggressive, saying that, okay, we actually need the Cup guys up there. We need the Cup guys to actually show that we're good enough to get to the next level. What I'm thinking in response to that is that, okay, did they need the Cup drivers to be competing against them on the short tracks when they were starting out? Did they need to compete against them in the Legends or late models or anything like that? Did they need Cup drivers in every single level up the rankings to show that they needed to be where they needed to be? And I'm not so sure about that. I don't think that's comparable. And yeah, Benjamin, you bring up a good point. Yeah, I mean, there's the other difference that Petty had. Yeah, those those really long seasons. I know doing the NASCAR statistics, it was challenging because you had some seasons that were even like the races that were later in the calendar year actually counted towards the beginning of the next year because they were just running so many other events. And we talk about the West Coast swing now. They used to have like a Northern Tour, and they would just run races up there, and a lot of different local competitors that you'd be racing against. I would think that the Petty situation is actually would be more challenging because if you really think about if you had that today. I mean, if you had the Cup Series as a singular national touring series that you had. I mean, I mean that's where it gets a little tricky, I guess, to compare Petty and Kyle Busch's thing. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, in Kyle Busch's deal, you're competing against the best of the Truck Series guys, the best of the Xfinity Series guys, and the best of the Cup Series guys. But generally, if you have like one central championship that Petty was competing for in NASCAR, when you just had just the Cup Series back then, and you had 50 or 60 races a year, and you had local drivers you were competing against. But again, in each one of those events, generally you're going to be competing against other drivers that are also going for the championship. So you had David Pearson, you had Bobby Allison, you had Buddy Baker, you had Cale Yarborough, you had all these other drivers, and yeah, you had some of those that didn't do all the events, but you had some that did. And then you have other drivers that would come in, and maybe some rookie just takes the field by storm. James Hilton did that at one point and actually challenged Richard Petty down the stretch. So it is a very different time, and it's hard to picture. I think, and Andrew, I see your comment there too. You're hitting the right point to compare different eras of one sport to another. I mean, the thought of having a version of NASCAR where you have 50 or 60 races a year, and there are all kinds of different tracks, at dirt tracks, at paved tracks, and local drivers and non-local drivers. It's all it could be argued that that would be the equivalent of just merging Cup, Xfinity, and Truck all together with those competitors. Maybe in some races you're competing against them, and some you're competing against these, but in general, you're always. I think it's that common core, though, that I think still stands Richard Petty's accomplishment in greater esteem. Because when Kyle Busch is competing in the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series, he's not competing against Jimmy Johnson generally. Jimmy hardly ever did any Xfinity races after he got up in the Cup. He did do a few. And I don't believe he did any Truck Series races, at least unless I'm forgetting any on that. You'd have a few people like your Mark Martins and Brad Keselowski's and stuff like that would dabble in that, and then they scaled back too. Clint Boyer also comes to mind. Okay, he did one truck race. Okay, so there you go. But one truck race, not winning 50, winning the most races in Truck Series history. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, it's. I think that one could say, and then and then I think the argument also about the level of the equipment, certainly the quality of the equipment that is being presented. Petty Enterprises, they were real trailblazers at the time, between them and the Wood brothers, in terms of perfecting things like just the concept of making a career out of stock car racing. And then what the Wood brothers more did on their end is, about perfecting pit stops and actually setting things up to where they are now. I mean, when you have that kind of an advantage, that's going to play out. You're going to have more wins. You're going to be more successful in that sense. And then, if you have Joe Gibbs Racing, arguably the best team that's around now, or and the feelers that they have out in the Xfinity program, and then certainly in Kyle Busch Motorsports and the Truck Series as well. They just make something work out for them, and it is, and that's kind of where the discussion gets difficult. Is you start splitting hairs about one versus the other, but it must be said that it just doesn't feel the same, and it's not about Kyle personally or anything like that. It's more, it's just taking advantage of certain exceptions in the rules and trying to, do the most in these different circuits. But it's it's a subject that we're all going round and round on. I still think that, I mean, I don't think that in Richard Petty's time that you would have like, a race on the Northern Tour, like, that they would say, oh, we don't want Richard Petty out here, or we don't know if we're good enough to get into NASCAR if, unless we're racing against Richard Petty this week. Because back then it was part of the Cup Series calendar. And so you were racing against Richard Petty. It would be, to me, the equivalent of Richard Petty running against local drivers and smaller fields and unique events is the equivalent of what I would think is like, if you had somebody like Christopher Bell or Matt Crafton, people that are top drivers, Johnny Sauter, even though Sauter had been in the Cup Series before, and Crafton very briefly, trying to get up into the Cup Series, and then just by actually doing so, by actually entering a car, and maybe it's not a top flight ride, but it's a car in the field, and that's the best way to know if you were able to match wits with Richard Petty back then. And but doing nowadays with Kyle Busch, and then just jumping back into the Xfinity and the Truck Series, where they have all the resources, even if Kyle Busch is going to be handicapped with like using the Eric Jones's pit crew in the Xfinity race, that's not really having one hand tied behind your back. That's a whole different situation there. But that's kind of where I hang up on that. And I know I've said that a lot on Twitter, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But yeah, I still think if the argument is that you need to have Cup guys in lower levels because the guys in lower levels need to see if they're able to compete against Cup guys, then go into Cup. And even if you're not driving a very good quality car or anything like that, you can still learn a lot from it. You can learn a lot about the cars, which is the overarching issue, and then also against the competitors. So that seems the more logical thing to me. Other than that, you need to learn the racecraft, and quite honestly, to gain the confidence. And nothing gains more confidence than actually winning the race. And you're not going to be able to win the race more often than not. If you got the Cup guys in there. I mean, look what had to happen to Kyle Busch for Cole Custer to get back up there. And Custer had a fantastic car in that Xfinity race, but that last little bit put him over the top. Could he have got around him one-on-one? Seemed like he probably could have, but who knows? So enough on that. But again, we're gonna hear nothing but that this week anyway. So yeah, so talking about the aero package from this race here today, I thought it seemed like it certainly during the first two stages we actually had a pretty competitive race. I would say. I think what I was most interested in is that I know this was talked about during the Xfinity race, was the ability of the composite bodies to like flex and be more forgiving than the Cup Series bodies when you made contact with the wall or made contact with another driver. You had a situation where some guys were actually kind of coming back into competition even after a setback. Even in the Cup Series today, though, we saw perhaps the aero package was something that helped out with this. Both Martin Truex Jr. and Eric Jones get pretty significant damage in that accident on the one lap restart in stage one, and then getting back into the competition. And then, even though Jones faded at the end, he had a really good run going through the event. And Martin Truex, of course, getting the top 10, even when it seemed like over the radio communications, sounded like he was kind of starting to check out or just getting frustrated after a while from everything that was happening. But good showing by them, and I think maybe is the aero package helping with that, or is that something that they just had really good equipment? Because again, they're both teammates of Kyle Busch, so it could certainly be argued that way. But that was that was interesting to see. So it's hard to say, because I remember doing Fontana last year. I had been to that race in person. I heard when getting ready to do the article that night, I remember reading a lot of posts and comments about it. Everybody just talking about how boring that race was. And what I thought was really interesting in that one was one where Kevin Harvick hit the wall, and much like on a much greater degree than what we saw with Eric Jones and Truex today, trying to get back into competition after getting damage to their car and getting back into competition. That was really interesting, and seeing if it can meet minimum speed. I mean, I thought for sure that was going to be his first last place finish. Turned out that it wasn't going to happen until a few rounds later at Charlotte. But it's we'll see what happens. I mean, it's going to be nice to get a little bit of a reprieve next week with Martinsville and actually going back to the short tracks and going back to close racing that really doesn't need to be helped a whole lot. And that'll be interesting to see. Now the I'm just looking over your comments here and just checking everything else. Yeah, 2008. Yeah, 2008 Bristol with Randy Moss was when Jimmy Johnson drove in the Truck Series. Yeah, that was the 81 team, I believe it was. That was, gosh, can't believe that was so long ago. It was like 11 years ago now. But It's it'll be interesting. But thoughts on IK9? I don't really have any thoughts too much about it. I mean, I other than what I already posted online the other day. I know I posted the picture that Scene Vault had about JD Stacy back with Stacy's logos were just on all the cars, and somebody else pointed this out after the fact, where we've seen this before. We've seen this with big companies coming into the sport, and just seemingly out of nowhere. And maybe they think like, they start with a smaller team and they just kind of get their legs under them. And then all of a sudden they're just everywhere. And, IK9 is certainly in that mold. It reminds me a little bit of, well, I guess like Sirius Radio for one thing. Remember they used to sponsor Casey Atwood in 2002. And then like they started having a larger and larger influence. Of course, they had NASCAR channel of their own. They sponsored the race of Watkins Glen. But the JD Stacy one seems to be the more example of that, because it's now to the point where, I think what was it? It was last week at Arizona ISM Raceway. They didn't have a sponsor for the Xfinity race, and then all of a sudden, like the day before, they said, "Oh, well, IK9 is sponsoring that," or IK9 last year was sponsoring the '96 team of the Gaunt brothers, and then this year suddenly they're jumping in both with 2 feet over at Joe Gibbs Racing with Jeffrey Earnhardt. Jeffrey Earnhardt had driven for the Gaunt brothers, so it seemed like they had a relationship. Now it's spilled over to Kyle Busch, of course, and now Kyle's won his most recent Xfinity races on his way to 200 in those cars. And we'll see how long it lasts. I mean, it could be just another one of these things where, it burns brightly for just a little bit, and then, and then it kind of fizzles out. Or are they going to stay in a bit longer? I mean, certainly at the point where we are in NASCAR, they need to get as many sponsors as possible and get as much backing as they can in the sport. And if we get it, even if it's something in short term and they're really excited about it, they want to build it up, maybe something like the equivalent of like a Team Red Bull or something, where they even go to the point of even starting their own team and getting stuff out there. That can only help. I mean, certainly we want more permanent solutions. I mean, we would like to believe that a sponsor would come into the sport and really dig its roots into it and just become something that we all want it to be there. We all want it to be a part of the sport, and to the point that we can't think of it without it. I think the best example that I can think of is Toyota, actually. Now, I know people aren't really huge fans of Toyota. I know that's the whole thing about, the American brands versus the foreign manufacturers and everything. But you got to admit they've really committed, to the sport, very much in depth. They've done as much as they can to not just be, the technical work and the advertising with the teams and everything, and signing with very big programs like Joe Gibbs Racing, but also in their advertisements and being tied in with the redevelopment at Daytona and the display there. I think we talked about this a while back, but it does kind of refer back to that a little bit. Will IK9 be like that? Will it? I mean, as not an auto manufacturer, of course it can't be, but as a sponsor, is it going to be close to that level? I mean, hopefully. I mean, I'll give any of these companies the benefit of the doubt. Anybody that wants to put their logos on a Cup car or an Xfinity car or something like that, that's only going to help. One thing I wish they would do that with Brandon Brown in the '86 team. I know we've been talking about them the last couple of weeks. Excuse me. How about those guys? I mean, that's the '86 car in the Xfinity series. They just keep plugging away. I mean, what was it? It was 2 straight 15th place finishes, I believe. Let me post my Baccarella article. I have that one finished. I know I had the statistic in there. I'll go ahead and post that and put the link in here while we're waiting for everything here. Post. Oh, come on. There we go. And we'll talk more, of course, about the Xfinity race as well as we get that together. Let me just look at the section that I have here. Yes, Brandon Brown and Gray Galding by extension, not teammates, of course. Brandon Brown with the Brandon-built team and Gray Galding with SS Greenlight. They restarted 10th and 12th with 34 laps to go yesterday. They finished the final 2 cars in the lead lap in 15th and 16th with Brown ahead of Galding. Still no sponsorship on the '86. The 08 having their sponsorship still. Brown is yet to finish worse than 18th, which was in the Daytona opener. He sits 14th in points. Galding now sits 16 points behind Brandon Brown. Excuse me. And has finished 16th in 3 of his last 4 races, not counting his season best 12th in Las Vegas. The only difference between Galding and Brown was the struggle that Galding had at Daytona, where he had the wreck on pit road. And even in that one, he started 5th. So both those teams and both those drivers continuing to have a great start to the season. Can't be happier for them. And, hope to see a lot more of that coming up here. Let me just post the link here while I get this. And then we'll, of course, talk more about the backup cars, everything in there. Yep, DC Solar, that's also been mentioned. Talking about the IK9 subject, it did seem like, I think any company where you hear about them in racing and you get kind of an idea of what their company's about, and but you wonder, like, okay, well, how can I see kind of what their business model is or what they're trying to do, but I don't get why they would make a whole lot of money at it. That's kind of where you get a little bit, you start kind of raising your antenna a little bit. And the IK9 one, that's kind of, that feels more like that than DC Solar. I know with DC Solar, there's a whole lot of, the green initiatives and a lot of efforts into alternative fuels and everything like that, and alternative energy, and promoting that in NASCAR. I can see that because, of course, we're using fossil fuels and all that stuff. I mean, perhaps a way to kind of raise awareness and talk about the future or something like that. But with IK9, I'm still not 100% on what they do. I mean, I guess it sounds like, it looks like it's a military organization, something with dogs, something with perhaps a veterans initiatives, something like that. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a well-run business, or a business doesn't need to serve itself or anything like that. I mean, it sounds like they do some good work. I know that Jeffrey Earnhart's, in particular, has been tied to a lot of these military-themed companies and promoting his team and promoting his racing career. And I hope that he still gets some good runs out of the 18, the Xfinity car, out of it there. So it sounds like they've really been interested in there. But again, it could go either way. Is it going to be like DC Solar, or is it going to be more than that? The service dog trainer, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, Extreme Concepts security division. Yeah, I know that they had the Extreme Concepts logos on a lot of Jeffrey's cars last year, like when he was driving for the Gaunt Brothers and Premium Motorsports before that. Okay. Yeah, I do a lot of government stuff and talking. Very profitable. Okay. So again, yeah, service dogs. I mean, that's certainly a big business. Not just in a military context, but certainly law enforcement and the disabled and everything. So yeah, I mean, more power to them. And I this is why I'm really anxious to kind of start covering these races in person, and kind of do some more research on maybe talk with some of the people that are involved in the programs and everything, and learn a bit more about them. I'm sure they do some stuff at the track and everything to promote their program, or at least I hope they have, because it seems like they're really working on getting their visibility, really where they want it to be in terms of their sponsorship and sponsorship of the races. So we'll see what happens. Again, any of these companies, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If they want to sponsor NASCAR, then they're good in my book. We've seen, whether it was Extends, the male enhancement products, or you have just all kinds of random sponsors over the years. You remember the Boudreaux's butt wipes car back then? Or I think that was one of the last ones that Junie Donlavey had the sponsorship for. I mean, you could have a silly name or a silly concept or something like that. I'm not saying IK9 is a silly concept, but just anything. Like, I mean, any of these companies getting on there, it's good to, money's all the same in that sense. So hopefully that helps them out. But yeah, I mean, but talking about, Brandon Brown and Greg Alding, that's continued to be, I think, the Xfinity story that I wish would get even more coverage than it's been getting. I've been trying to track it in on the website here at lastcar.info. And also I've been kind of expanding that into our entry list articles during the week. I try to have like a give a call section in there. I did that this past week when I talked about the two of them, because I think that's important. I usually save that for the weekly articles and kind of put that at the very end after talking about the last place finisher. That way it's not just, I don't want to stay too like negative or anything like that in the story. I don't want it to just be about, the struggles of these teams. There's also some good stories on there to kind of offset it. I still haven't found if the entry list article or the weekly article is a better place for it. So I'm kind of doing both right now, but we'll see how that works. I know one I haven't talked about too much this year is Ryan Sieg's team. That's kind of because of the point. I'm almost to the point where it's unusual when they don't finish well. I mean, Ryan is like frequently getting up there, like just knocking on the door of top tens every week. And like he's been tweeting lately, he's disappointed when they don't get in the top 10, as he should. They've had really good equipment and really trying to get up there. And something that was pointed out, and I put it on here as well, was that Sieg's already matched his season best marks in top fives and top tens. There's still 28 races left to do this year. I believe this was pointed out when he had his last top 10, not by me. Somebody else was pointing it out. But I thought it was a fascinating thing to think about, because if you think, I mean, that's just this early in the year. I mean, we haven't even got to Talladega or Daytona, or the second Daytona race yet. We haven't got to both the Iowa standalone races yet, where that team in particular seemed to really be kind of catching fire there. They could be certainly on their way to a career best season, and then who knows what happens in the playoffs from there. So that would be an interesting story. It'd be great to see them get their first win, but we'll see what happens. So, but yeah, we're talking about talking about qualifying. My goodness, let me check my notes here. We are about 35 minutes into the wait time here as we wait for potential results from inspection. Yeah, let's talk about that qualifying format, because that was just a mess. I mean, let's see. Oh yeah, we got that one to talk about too. So for those of you who haven't, I mean, I'm sure everybody in here has pretty much been following it. You had the qualifying situation, multiple rounds, knockout qualifying. If you don't get past a certain threshold in round one, you don't get to round two. And if you don't get past the one in round two, you get to round three. So everybody gets through 2 rounds, and they're all waiting for like the last second to go out there and try to draft each other, because they want to get that one lap at just the right time. And it's not a perfect science. It's the equivalent of, I think, when I'm watching it, it reminds me a lot when when you're driving down the road and maybe somebody's pulling out of a driveway, like they're pulling out of like a gas station or something, and it's going to join the road, and that guy kind of creeps out as you're coming up to him. It reminds me of that. And it's like, look, when you're doing that, I'm sure you're doing that because you want to kind of get up to speed by the time the person's past you, so you can slot in behind them. And it's like, well, look, that's kind of, that always gets me kind of on edge, because I'm like, well, that person, does he really know like how fast I'm coming up to him, or how quickly he can get behind me, or something like that? That's kind of the equivalent of what happened in round 3 in this. Everybody was kind of just waiting around on the apron, and then or sitting on the edge of pit road, just waiting for that time to click down to like the last second. And then they're going down pit road, they're doing all this, oh no, you're going to go first, and you're going to go first, and just waiting out there. And they don't know how much time it's taking, or how much time they're going to take to get there, or if they're cutting it too close, because on top of all this, with the new aero package, the cars are running slower than they did before, just last year. So they get around to turn number 4, time runs out. By the time they've, this whole pack of 12 cars has just exited turn 4. So time runs out, they get to the stripe, none of their laps count, and it reverts back to round 2. I mean, just absolutely insane. I mean, it's and I said this originally after it happened, the qualifying format, and I know there's 2 schools of thought here, where on the one side we say, well, there's charters, we don't really have, we don't have more than enough teams to have people that don't qualify for the race. We don't have the go or go homers. We don't technically have the top 35 rule, although the charter system basically does that. Why even have qualifying? Why don't we just have heat races? Why don't we have stuff like that? And on the other hand, there's thought of, okay, well, let's just add some more rules to this. Let's take this exact same system and say, oh, okay, well, we'll have a rule where you can't wait till the last 10 minutes. You have to be rolling off pit road with 2 minutes to go, or 5 minutes to go, or your lap doesn't count. Now you can do that. It's just insane. I mean, both those options, I think, are just ridiculous. First of all, again, if NASCAR has always had this trend where they want to add more rules to existing rules, instead of just saying like, okay, look, this isn't working anymore. Let's just go back to what the old system was, what was in place before. And the way I always view it is like the new, like new Coke. You can just say like, look, you don't have to say we're going back on this. Just call it Coke Classic, and just say like, hey, it's a new product, but it tastes like what it used to. And then just do something like that. And then, I always thought if they get rid of the playoffs one day, they could just call it Playoff Classic. And then it's just like, oh, it's 36 races, and each race counts towards a championship. I had a rant on this in my video that I did on the Patreon there, talking about Dale Earnhardt in 2001 and everything, and about how the three most critical elements of racing aren't really true anymore. That the first car to the finish line is always the winner. That the fastest car in qualifying wins the pole, and that whoever gets the most points in the year wins the championship. That like none of those things are true. I know that I'm painting in broad strokes when I talk about the person, being the first across the finish line as the race winner, because generally that is still true. But of course, there's a couple of things between the green white checker rule and going into overtime on the one hand, and so it's not the person that's leading at the end of regulation, And then on the other hand, I'm thinking more of the yellow line rule, so that there's track limits, and then if you go outside those track limits and reach the finish line first, then they take that win away. We just saw that with Justin Haley last year, and then more famous examples with Regan Smith before that. Heat races, again, I'm not, and something I think is interesting with heat races is that option is that I'd forgotten that they had them in the Xfinity series, and they just very quietly stopped doing them. And I know that Justin Marks was last at Dover that one time because he got in a wreck in one of his heat races, and then was classified last in the main event because he wrecked his car. That was just the end of it. So that doesn't seem the best solution. So again, I'm in the camp of just single car qualifying. Excuse me. I think single car qualifying is very much like, watch the World of Outlaws, for example. It's good enough for them. I think it's one of the best parts of the race because and I think the most critical component that NASCAR is overlooking in this is that single car qualifying, unlike group qualifying, is actually, you can actually follow it from the grandstands. It's very easy to follow. It's very easy to understand. I think that NASCAR needs to get to a point now where they have things that are easy to understand. If they're trying to bring in new people to the sport, they need to make it easy. And if they're trying to keep people that are interested in the sport, a lot of the people that are longtime fans of the sport, they think back to when it was a bit easier. So I know that, and I'm not saying that there aren't things that have been done in the new format that we can't use in that. I know that this was brought up on Twitter as well, talking about you take a full field and you take the practice results and you go from like slowest to fastest. That's fine. You can do it that way, and that then if the better draw is towards the end of the session, then the fastest car should have that advantage. They could be able to. The people that are fastest in practice should have the best chance of being fastest in qualifying. Or if it's like Indianapolis, or at least how it used to be, that they would do qualifying in the morning, and you want to be a real early draw, then it should be the other way. And then the first people out should be the fastest cars. Then you work it out that way. So I think that would be a better option. Yeah. And again, I still think just one round. I'm kind of done with the rounds, to be perfectly honest. I think just one time through, because again, and I talked about this, I think just last week. It's always like, okay, well, you can go around and do one lap, and then you're as fast as you are. It's like, okay, well, yeah, you did it once. Let's see if you can do it twice. Oh, you did it twice. Let's see if you can do it 3 times. It's like, no, like, come on. It's one of the things. I'll be perfectly honest. I know a lot of you guys are fans of the starting grids and everything. One thing that one thing that really kind of sucked the fun out of doing the starting grids was the multiple round qualifying session, because you really limited the options of having unusual drivers towards the front of the field. You wanted to talk about stories, at least I wanted to talk about stories where somebody had like a career best qualifying run, or maybe their best qualifying run at the track, and say, well, this person hadn't qualified better than 16th here, and he started outside pole. That's a great story. And you could build that all the way to the race. And then of course, when somebody doesn't, somebody has a practice accident or an engine change or something, it has a greater consequence because it turned out to be a really good story a couple of days ago. And then it's like, oh man, it's too bad they can't start at the front. Now it seems like people get sent to the back, and it's not even any skin off anybody's nose or anything. So, we had it with the front row guys today. 2 of the 3 cars there had to get sent to the back, and it gets mentioned, but both of them were mid pack they were mid pack anyway, so it didn't really make a big story on that. But I think. Again, I think back to the World of Outlaws with qualifying. If you're sitting in the grandstands and watching qualifying go by, everybody can understand. It's like, oh, this guy's the fastest, and then this guy's the fastest. Everybody responds to that really well. The excitement of that. And again, it's there are things that are organic in the sport that already lend themselves to being exciting, and they don't have to be a five wide battle or a photo finish or a last second restart or something like that. Qualifying is its own unique thing, and it's always its own entertaining kind of deal there. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Um, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes you had the 13th place driver was better than the 10th place guy. Exactly. I mean, I think in the first race that they had the multiple round format of qualifying, Kevin Harvick qualified 13th, ended up being dominant in the race. And he didn't quite have enough to get into the final round, but he ended up having the fastest car anyway. So that's at least that's what I seem to remember. It seemed like that happened pretty early on in the format, because then I know everybody was saying, well, he's got the best car in the field. It's like, well, why didn't he win the pole? But I know the fastest car doesn't always win. That's a famous saying in racing, so that's not a new thing in that sense. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. So the other thing that we have to talk about, of course, this week is the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Can't forget about that. So and again, I've made my piece on this as well. The issue of the new six drivers that were brought in there and comparing statistics and everything and saying, okay, is this the Hall of Statistics, or is this like something more about intangibles? And and I know that there's a lot of things that that have and haven't been done in the Hall of Fame that it'd be nice if they were done a little bit differently. And I know we have to kind of work in the paradigm that we're in now. Um, I I always thought that the Hall of Fame should have started with a group of people that pretty much everybody could agree should be in there. I think that should have been handled right away. I think that it's so difficult to say right from the outset and look at the entire history of NASCAR up to, what was it, 2010 when they started it, up to that point, and then say, okay, we're going to pick like five people out of the entire history of the sport as the most important, as the most obvious people that should be in here. And that's so difficult because racing is very different from like football or baseball or something like that. There's so many people that are involved. I mean, if you not just the drivers, the team owners, the track promoters, the France family, the officials. I would even, I'd say pit crew members. Even, I mean, Chocolate Myers should probably be in there. I mean, I don't even know if pit crew members even get nominated or anything. These are things that crew chiefs. I mean, again, the list goes on and on and on. There's so many people that are involved. To limit it just to five people, that is something that is an impossible task. It's impossible. And it's also going to breed a lot of resentment, as happened inevitably when they started this and said, okay, well, David Pearson and Darrell Waltrip weren't in the first group. It's ridiculous. They should both be in there. And there's some people that also you bring up that they're completely inseparable, that they are, again, you mentioned a whole lot of people that are involved in things at the same time. I mean, if you're just talking about Richard Petty, for example, I mean, he's the theme of the day here with the 200 wins. You got to talk about Richard Petty. You got to talk about Dale Inman, his crew chief. You got to talk about Maurice, his brother. You got to talk about Lee, his father. I mean, you got to talk about, so many other people. That, I mean, that's four people right there. And, and then you talk about other people beyond that. I mean, you think of one person, you think about another person and another, and it builds from there. And again, and I don't like complaining this much about that because it's unavoidable. It's already done. They did the first class. It was just a few people, and now we're stuck in this situation now where we have to say, okay, well, is this guy greater than this guy? Is Buddy Baker greater than Ned Jarrett? Is Fireball Roberts greater than Wendell Scott? I mean, all these things, these are impossible questions to ask, and yet they must be asked. And I get you have to do. They try to fan this out as best as they can. They have people that they have the people that actually are the people that vote. You have past members that vote. You have fan votes. You try to do this as much to reduce the margin of error as much you can. But you're always going to leave people upset when you have something like that. And it's one thing if it's like the Baseball Hall of Fame or Football Hall of Fame or something like that, where you have groups of people. I'm not sure exactly the way that operates, but I assume that they've both been around for much longer than just 2010, and have so many other people that are in there. But it was interesting to me in this particular group, and I thought this was very strange to talk about, that, okay, why is Neil Bonnet in the group and why is Carl Edwards not in the group? And I was interested in that because I didn't realize that that was the battle there, that was where the line should be drawn. Like, okay, it's Carl Edwards' first year of eligibility for this, I suppose. And then, and Neil Bonnet is somebody from, from the past, and another one that, in my mind, certainly should be considered. How do you juggle all that together? And it really, in discussing it revealed to me that, yeah, it really is difficult to bring up. Do in what ways? I know that people look at the statistics and say, okay, well, in the statistics, Carl Edwards was much greater than Neil Bonnet. I mean, we're talking about the number of wins in the Cup Series, the number of accomplishments, the Xfinity Series championship, being so close to the Cup Series championship, his popularity, charitable work, and I know that people are talking about maybe the fact that he retired, in his prime and so young and everything was something that wasn't in his favor. Well, that's not anything new to the sport. I mean, Fred Lorenzen did that. Ned Jarrett did that, although not by his personal decision. That actually, there's a great story about that in the NASCAR Scene Vault podcast. Definitely give that a listen. Yeah, I mean, well, actually, yeah, and Beast of Metal, you mentioned Elmo Langley. I mean, these are other people that should be considered as well. But talking about, the greatness of Edwards versus Neil Bonnet or versus other competitors, it's the same situation we're having right now with Kyle Busch and comparing him to Richard Petty and comparing the accomplishment of what is 200 wins. And it's a very difficult task, but I still think that the intangibles are certainly what set Neil Bonnet apart from Carl Edwards. Carl Edwards has the numbers. He was certainly a proven winner. He was a proven, he's one of the best drivers to never win a championship, right up there with Mark Martin. One of the best drivers to not win a Daytona 500, right up there with Terry Labonte. There's so many other, drivers that it's really hard to rank. But with Neil Bonnet, and I talked about this in the video that NASCAR Man did last month. I mean, we're talking about a driver that overcame a lot of injuries, and but just his love for the sport, the fact that he stayed in it well past the point that he really, perhaps should have, or perhaps felt that he should have. He loved the sport so much that he continued to keep coming back, that he came back after he had a bad wreck at Charlotte in 1987, and then he finished top 5 in the Daytona 500 the next year, won his last 2 races, the last one at the Richmond Fairgrounds, and winning at Rockingham the week after that on Hoosier tires. He did that, and then you had, he had the injury at Darlington, was off the circuit for a while, had the terrible accident at Talladega in 1993, came back from that, got the ride with James Finch, and then, of course, the tragedy that happened at Daytona in 1994. And in between all of that was such a successful broadcaster. I mean, again, I liken it to Darrell Waltrip in the booth today. If you're a new fan and you only thought of Darrell Waltrip as the broadcaster and didn't think about him as a driver, and then suddenly he's going to do a 6-race Winston Cup schedule and start with the Daytona 500 and try to run in that for a 19th or 20th time. That would be incredible. And that was the equivalent of it. And I think, we talk about putting Kyle Busch's 200 wins in perspective with Richard Petty. We talk about trying to put Carl Edwards' accomplishments in perspective with Neil Bonnet. You do have to look back at history. And even though they're not one-on-one, I think it's those intangibles that bring them together. The things that aren't necessarily statistics, but things about the personality that come across. Think about the driver's determination, their skill, who they were, and their story. Really, is it a story that's worth telling? Is it a story that is symbolic of the spirit of NASCAR in that sense? And I think that's, again, it's a difficult question to ask, just like the question of which 5 people are brought in each time. But again, some of these guys are linked together, like when they bring Davey Allison and Alan Kulwicki in together after what happened to them. It's a difficult process, but I think that's where it should be. I think that's where the difference comes in. And I think the difference between Neil Bonnet and Carl Edwards, which with respect to Carl Edwards, of course, I mean, and to his accomplishments, we don't. The thing with Neil Bonnet was, his spirit and his determination and his insistence on continuing to compete in the sport. And in this, and the Hall of Fame has rewarded that in the past already. I mean, they have with Wendell Scott, and I know you can talk about the racial component and everything in there too, and certainly that played a role in it, of course. Not to minimize that, but he was also a very determined independent driver. He had stayed in the sport for many years. And tragically his career was cut short when he was injured that badly at Talladega in the 70s. But and the spirit of him and the spirit of the independent competitor and the spirit of a driver that had such love for the sport that he was going to let anything stop him from doing it. Those are the kind of stories that need to be in the Hall of Fame, or at least those are the kind of stories that should be brought in right away. And then that contextualizes anybody that comes in later. Carl Edwards is a young person, and he'll get in. He'll get in one of these days. But I think it's important to lay the groundwork, for what the Hall of Fame should represent, what it means to be, somebody that is recognized for their accomplishments in the sport. And are we just going to go from the top of the win list and then work our way down? It's like, okay, we're going to get down to here. We'll get down to Bobby Allison this year, and then we'll get down to Cale Yarborough, Rusty Wallace this year. No, I think that's ridiculous, and they haven't done that. But I am more or less happy with the people that they've brought in so far. I feel I like that they've again tried to branch out between just drivers and actually bring in team owners and crew chiefs and drivers from other circuits, like bringing in modified drivers, bringing in other competitors from other time periods, and still mixing in drivers from recent years. I mean, you still have Rusty Wallace, you have Dale Earnhardt, you have Richard Petty. It wouldn't be complete if you didn't have those guys in there. It's still not complete now without Buddy Baker in it, or without somebody like that in there. So I'm still trying to remember who else is on. Well, Smokey Yunick, there's another one. I know that's been talked a lot about and pointed at, and rightfully so. You talk about a guy that has had a significant effect on the sport. Talk about a person that has changed the trajectory of the sport to its current trajectory now. The technical aspect of it. We've brought in Bud Moore. We've talked about Glenn Wood. Smokey Yunick needs to be honored in the exact same regard as either of them. So, and that's the kind of thing that brings it up. And I think, I know that it's frustrating that maybe it seems like they don't always put in like the best person at the right times or anything, but I think they're laying that groundwork. They're setting that actual foundation up, and they're going to build that up over time. So, hopefully we'll get there, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, so looking at the Xfinity race again, I've just, as I've shown here, I posted the article there on the Xfinity race. Again, talking about the spirit of stock car racing, I'm kind of trying to find a good transition back into this. The fact that these different teams help each other out. I'm very interested in the story with DGM Racing, which is owned by Mario Gosselin. They field the number 90 and sometimes the 92 car in the Xfinity series. That is the team that has Cesar Baccarella was driving for at Fontana this past week, and got his first last place finish driving what ended up being the backup car from Jimmy Means Racing. And Jimmy Means is it's always interesting to follow his team, not just from his very significant role in putting together the book about JD McDuffie, but also the fact that the team is still in operation today, still fielding competitive cars. Joey Gase has got his first top 5 at Talladega a couple of years ago, and David Starr is still doing a workmanlike job in the 52 here. When Baccarella had his accident in the number 90 car, that Means lent over, the backup car for David Starr, just ran the first lap, throttled back at the back of the pack, pulled the car in after one lap, and they at least got the start and actually got to, stay up in it. I had forgotten when writing it until I redrafted it. And this was actually the second straight event that DGM Racing had to go to a backup car. They had done the same thing with Ronnie Bassett last week at the ISM Raceway. Had an accident in practice, car gets cycled out. They had to bring up the backup car Josh Williams was going to drive in the number 36 and then field that car instead. So, then this week, Williams was driving that car, and so they basically didn't have a bullet in the chamber left. So, good on Means for helping him out. We'd seen this before where Means had fielded a third car, or not a third car, a second car, in the Xfinity series when they had short fields back in the 40 car field times. Ran the number 79 a few times. We'd seen Carl Long himself drive that, a couple times before. I know I linked that in the article on here. I believe it was a feature from back in 2013 or 2014. Let me see here. What was that? 2014, correct. And the link in the article there shows a picture of the 79. Same thing when they cover the 52 on with a big piece of white tape and just mark out numbers there. And then hey, you got a full field. So and in fact, that team didn't even finish last in the race. Ended up completing 3 more laps than Jeff Green's last place run in that, when Green himself was running a backup car for TriStar Motorsports. So that's always an interesting story. So it's good to see these teams still help each other out. I know we talk about the level of competition in the sport and that, things don't, some of these teams are certainly more private than others and sharing their material. I mean, just ask Furniture Row about that, about the value of being affiliated with Joe Gibbs Racing and Toyota's flagship organization. On the other end of the garage area, it's a very different story. It's very much like your average Saturday night short track deal, especially in the Xfinity series, where a large part of the field is like that. So it's good to see that there, where teams are helping each other out, especially on the West Coast swing, where they're so far away from the shops in Charlotte. You can't just call over another car right away. Usually they only have the only hauler that they can bring any equipment with is all right there. So a lot of technical aspects that they have to work out, and a lot of things of that matter. But an interesting part of it. But let's see. The NASCAR results just got refreshed here. So I'm just pulling up the Twitter links here, see if anything else is coming in here. Seeing plenty of Kyle Busch's 200 wins here. Shows him high up on the recommended. Nick Bromberg's tweet here. Kyle Busch is now 0 wins away from Richard Petty's 200 wins. What a time to be alive. See, well, gosh, what about that one article that was posted yesterday when they thought he was going to dominate and win that Xfinity race? He did win the first 2 stages, just like today, but didn't quite shake off Cole Custer in that pit road incident. And so that article got the great shots of the Dewey defeats Truman thing from the 1948 election there. Interesting to see. So yeah, just checking out. Pretty much just all Kyle all day on the page here. Anything new about the results yet. Let's look at Pockrass's page here. As we now reach, where are we in the timing right now? Let's see. We are an hour and 2 minutes into the wait from inspection, so we have a little ways to go here. We'll go ahead and see what's going on here. Austin Dillon walked from his car to an awaiting cart with medical personnel after the race, so certainly hoping that he's feeling better. Again, gutting it out there to the finish, and that seems to be the trend that's really paid off for a lot of these Cup guys this year, between Keselowski's win at Atlanta and then Austin Dillon's top 10 right here. But he's got a little bit of time to kind of regroup for Martinsville next week. That's really a tricky one to do. I mean, I imagine there's no easy race to do if you're not feeling 100%. But yeah, I got to talk about that restart. I mean, again, I talked about that restart already. The one lap restart at the end of stage 1. I mean, it seemed like there was just an unusually long caution period that preceded that. These stage cautions seem to just be getting longer and longer. And then you restart it with 1 lap to go. And of course, what happens? They're going 5 wide. Almirola gets to the back of Stenhouse, slides up the track, and then you got yourself a full-on, tangle. Yeah. But, and it was unfortunate. I mean, it was unfortunate for Kyle Larson and Truex in particular, because it seemed like and for Stenhouse for that matter. All 3 of them seemed to have really good cars at the beginning of it. And I know that racing in its purest and simplest form is the process of watching one driver at a time lose the race until somebody wins it. All the way until your second place guy is, chasing down the leader and just runs out of time. That's very much, racing is entirely about attrition. It's just unfortunate to have it happen that early and things like that. But and I think this was brought up by Jayski the other day, talking about the qualifying format, kind of bring it full circle to that. That luck always plays a role in the sport, and I know that sounds obvious, but there's a lot of aspects of the sport that NASCAR is trying to control or trying to change, trying to make things as level as possible, and say, we're going to do the qualifying order and the order of practice or things like that, or create a new aero package that's going to be more competitive. These are all things that they've tried doing different things like that. You can have these certain advantages, but then just have bad luck and just fall out of it. I mean, Clint Boyer is a perfect example of that today. Seemed to have a great car, was right up there when the car was starting to go sour, and then it just gradually faded away from there and fell to the end of the race. Anybody can be. Not anybody can be a race winner. I mean, it's really difficult to get up there. There's a lot of slings and arrows you have to dodge, but just about anybody can be last place. I mean, really, you could be the pole sitter and just conk out on the first lap with an engine problem. So that element in there, that element of unpredictability is always going to be there. And, even on St. Patrick's Day, it's going to be, bad luck is not something that can be missed there. Oh yes, and I'm sorry. Yeah, I've seen a couple of you guys said that you haven't seen the end of the race there. Spoiler alert: Kyle Busch won the race. Nothing really else happened at the end of it. There, we had a situation where Keselowski and Joey Logano were battling each other at the end of the race. They had worked their way up to the front of the field. Keselowski and Logano both seemed to have pretty equally matched cars, but then engaged in a really drastic battle down the backstretch. Probably the last significant moment in the race there. They were actually chasing each other down to the apron on the backstretch and chasing themselves back up. And at that time, Kyle Busch had worked his way all the way up to third after his pit road speeding issue by 0.04 of a mile an hour, and then all that happening. But it worked his way all the way up to third and was right there where he needed to be, just like back when Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin tangled for the lead at Fontana just a few years ago. He reeled them back in, got back around him, and that was about the end of it. And it was an interesting role reversal. I think Kyle very much learned from what happened in the Xfinity race on Saturday, where Cole Custer had the lead, and Kyle had worked his butt off to get all the way back up to second after another pit road issue that happened with Eric Jones's pit crew, getting his way all the way up to second, closing within about 1.4 seconds, and then just not being able to gain any ground and basically finishing with about that gap. So, in the Cup race here, he had instead got out to that lead, pulled out to about a 2-second lead, and been able to hold that. What that means going forward for the aero package will be interesting to see. I do think that it was a bit of a positive change. It would have been interesting. I kind of wish I had seen the race actually in person this year. It would have been interesting to compare it to from last year, because I know they get strung out. I mean, that's certainly the case. And the restarts are the most had been the most interesting parts with the old aero package. But with the new competition, you actually seem like they stayed together a little bit more often. I was kind of interested that they stayed about a half second off each other, even about 20 laps into the race, which I didn't think was possible at Fontana these days. Talking about watching older races here and trying to see the level of competition and try to reach better levels of it. But it would be interesting to see. Let's see. Taking another look here. Whoop, nope, let's not go there. Let's go here. But it was kind of yeah. It was again too bad for Truex. Seemed like he had a good start today. That's really a big thing. I think that's I think we're at a point now where it's a difficult way to measure the success of the aero package and if it's a quality racing product or if it's actually engaging to see. I think one way that I always measure it is two things. Well, the first one is that you have comers and goers. You have people that they don't just fall back and come back up through the field just by pit strategy or just by circumstance or anything like that, almost like a plate race, which is unfortunate with the new aero package. But if you have a situation where you could actually recall saying like, well, here's this person, he had a problem with his car at the beginning, like Truex, with the damage to the right rear, and then worked his way back into the top 10. Those are the kind of stories that really, I think, are engaging. Things that play into the uniqueness of stock car racing, that you can piece your car back together, even under the crash clock, and try to get your way back up to the front. It's so much rarer now, which is unfortunate because now you can't do anything with like big pieces of sheet metal or crafted fenders or anything like that. You got to just use tape and hope basically to keep those cars together in one piece. But yeah, it would be interesting if we see more of that going forward. And the other measurement that I would mention, and I think this is more goes again back to the broadcasters. I know I make too much of a thing out of this, but the ability to leave a race being able to say something about most of the starters in the race, to say just anything. And I didn't really realize until about 2008 when I was doing the original incarnation of LastCar.info was 43 stories. And I had attempted to do a full field rundown and at least have something to say about each starter in the field and like something that happened to him in the race. There would always be a large number of them where I just had to put no notes. Like it just didn't have anything significant that I could recall the broadcaster saying about him, or being revealed on social media or something of that sense. I mean, it didn't really have social media as much back then. It's really not Twitter, so maybe that was a big issue with putting that together. But really being able to take from it and say, okay, well, if somebody came up to you and said, well, somebody interested in racing came up to you and said, well, what do you think about Matt Tifft? And like you think like, oh, Matt Tifft, I forgot he was even out there this year. It's like, oh yeah, he's going for Rookie of the Year. And you mentioned something about like the 20th place finish that he had at Phoenix last week, or you mentioned the fact that his career in the Xfinity Series and getting into the Front Row Motorsports ride and running the 36 because he wanted to. He's a big Ken Schrader fan growing up, so he got to run one of his former numbers. That's kind of a mix more of the performance this year versus the context of his ride. But hearing a lot of that information and presenting it in that way, I think that's always something that really helps make a broadcast the very best that it can be. But yeah, it definitely seems like it's going to be Gibbs versus Penske this year. Yeah, I'd have to agree. We haven't even seen Truex really take off in the 19 there, but he's been knocking on the door. Today was probably his best overall performance. I know I'm making too much out of that, but certainly on top of his second place run at Atlanta when he was tracking down Keselowski, and he could have been more consistent in some of these other events, but we'll see what he does going forward. And then Eric Jones is still sitting in the wings there too. I thought he was very impressive today. After the damage that he sustained there, I guess it was just cosmetic. I was already thinking like it would be interesting if they actually roll that into victory lane with the big donut on the door. I know that would have provided some great visuals for any of the photographers and media in attendance. But overall, pretty positive feeling about how it's come out so far. So we'll see what goes on there. Okay, we are now. Let me adjust myself in my seat. It looked like a gumdrop here, sitting all slumped over like that. Okay, an hour and 12 minutes here. Looks like we're into it. So we're on the final stretch here, waiting for the results here. I'm not seeing anything from Pockrass's page or otherwise here about technical information. Last update was about an hour ago about Austin Dillon being brought out of his car. Yeah, Truex has had a lot of bad luck and some deep inflicted wounds. Yeah, I mean, goodness, just last year in particular, I know that, I mean, it's when a team is about to shut down, I can only imagine how disruptive that has to be. But even before the 78 team announced that they were closing their doors, they were just making ridiculous mistakes on pit road. And I know it's not above any team to just have a bad day here and there, but they seem to perfect leading the most laps and then just having something really ridiculous happen. And I think he was particularly determined to win a short track race that perhaps, I don't know if he psyched himself out or, you get tense and then, you're not, driving maybe as smoothly as you ordinarily would or something like that. We saw that at Richmond. I believe it was last spring. He just had pit road penalty after another at the end of the race and just completely just put himself out of contention, or being right up there at the lead and then spinning out towards the end of the race. And then so many other times that happened. The Bristol night race, he had a good run going, got wrecked out of near the top of this field, and then of course all of this culminating last fall at Martinsville with the situation that he had with Joey Logano and just racing Logano clean and Logano racing him less clean, and then you get a finish like that. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see on that, but will he get his first short track win next week? I mean, it'll be interesting. I'm sure the media would love to. Well, they're gonna definitely, if they have enough room after playing all the clips of Kyle Busch and Richard Petty's hat, and getting 200 wins, 200 wins across the top 3 series. Maybe they'll find a couple times to play the clip from NBC last year where Logano and Truex were running over each other trying to win Martinsville, and Denny Hamlin almost getting them both. That will be pretty much the story there. You mentioned Kevin Harvick, yeah. He looks a bit off. I mean, it doesn't take much to be off at the level that he's been performing. He seems just ageless, really, at this point. The level that he's able to compete at, and you kind of forget how long he's been in the sport, other than, of course, the dramatic circumstances that brought him in. It does seem like something a little bit is missing. I don't know if it's just something on the technical side of it there, because it seems like the other Ford Mustangs, certainly on the Penske camp, have really worked things out with the new model. So I don't know if it's so much that, or if it's something at Stewart Haas. Aric Almirola seems like he's off to just as good a start as he had before, and working his way in there. It's unfortunate that Bowyer didn't have as good of a run and ended up dropping to, my front page. But we'll see. Well, Logano, I didn't hear Logano's interview. I mean, that was playing in the background. It was kind of distracting me there on the screen there. Did he say something about his fans or anything like that? I don't know what was going on with that. I can't really comment on that, but I know Logano is the kind of person that rubs some people the wrong way. It seems like he did that pretty much right from the start, being sliced bread himself and all that. But I kind of feel like I'm kind of glad that we still have some of these competitors that have been in there and have stayed in there since 2001 or later. Because we need some veterans. We need some veterans to start getting old and start getting kind of crotchety and angry and develop more of a personality there in that way. And I think Logano is on the cusp of that from what he did there, and what happened with that. Missed about 20 minutes. You find out what happened with the 66's engine in Vegas. Nothing new on that. As a matter of fact, I mentioned this on the Twitter feed as well. I didn't really hear anything from the radio communications on the 66, and I thought it was my headphones here because it has a little volume control, and sometimes I knock that thing down, and other times it's the little tablet's not showing the race view, but it was working, and it was actually working on playing out the other channels and everything. I was able to hear what was happening with the 52 team when they were behind the wall, and then issues with Bowyer and everything. But no, I didn't hear anything else on the 66 radio. I know that Gase's PR representative was posting tweets saying that Gase was reporting issues with the car in a tight condition during the early laps. However, I never heard anything. So I don't know if they just either they weren't using the radios or something. I can't imagine why they would, but I mean, why they would stop using the radios, or they just didn't have their channel publicly available. I don't know if there's a way they can do that. Because of course NASCAR officials got to communicate with them if something happens. So I don't think that's the issue. But for whatever reason, yeah, I could not hear at all. And I was listening to the 66 a lot of that during it. I had my headphone in and had it all set up, checking with the volume levels or anything. So yeah, I didn't hear anything new on the 66, but I did notice that the car did have the logos for the Las Vegas chapter of Donate Life. And it basically looked exactly the same as the car they had in Las Vegas. Of course, the last round that they had the ducts open up on the front of the car there. So clearly it was the same car from Las Vegas, and clearly it was the same sponsorship and everything there. And Carl had said over the radio that they were going to work out a deal that they were going to run those logos for free this week. So they ran at it's just unfortunate. I hope that whatever finish they got there, that they were able to kind of offset that to some degree. But of course, as an open team, they just don't get they get the crumbs there as compared to the chartered programs. So we'll see what happens going forward. I don't know what their next planned Cup race is. I know that Chad Fincham ran for them at Bristol last spring. when he made his Cup Series debut at the 66. I don't know if that's their next planned attempt. I'm not counting on them running Martinsville, but I wouldn't count it out either, especially since the Xfinity Series is going to be off next week, and it's just going to be the Cup and the Truck Series. And Timmy Hill, on the same note, let's talk about that. Timmy Hill going into Truck Series team ownership. Timmy and his brother Tyler going to field the 56 in the Truck Series next week, and it's going to be interesting to see what they can do there. I don't know if that means that Carl Long's Cup effort isn't going to be at Martinsville next week, because I would think that they would probably put Hill in the car for that race if they could. Although I know Hermie Sadler usually seems to pick up rides from Martinsville in recent years, as he had for the number 7 car last year when he scored his first last place finish in quite some time. Just looking at the results here. Okay, looking at the unofficial results from the race here, it still shows it does show Boyer as the only last place finisher, but here it shows it as overheating and not an engine failure. I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but it's shown as an overheating issue instead of an engine issue. So perhaps whatever happened there had something to do with the increased temperature for the weekend, the less wind, and it just cooked the engine there. But yes, the only retiree from the race, BJ McLeod, ended up finishing 37th. Smithley, Gase, and Reed Sorensen in the 27 coming back. Good to see the 27 back on the track for the first time since Daytona, although it's basically just it sounds like it's another Premium Motorsports injury. It wasn't entered under Germain Racing, even though it was exactly the same paint scheme and exactly the same number configuration that they had at Daytona, only this time just running it at Fontana. So we'll see when they get injured next time. Have I heard anything new about Tommy Baldwin's team? No, haven't heard anything new from them. We last saw them at Daytona with Ryan Truex. Didn't quite make the show. Had a pretty good car, it seemed. It seemed like they were going to be right on it. Tommy Baldwin has a long history of getting his cars into the Daytona 500 since 2009. But, nothing new on that. Certainly wish Timmy and Tyler Hill the best of luck on the 56 team. There'll be ones, we'll talk about them more in the entry list article this Thursday. And talk about the stories going forward on that. Truck Series race at Martinsville is always an interesting one to check out. You usually get very big entry lists for that one, especially from drivers and teams that are just trying to get their start. So a perfect place for the Hills to try to get their start, although it's going to be just as difficult as some of these other events to actually really get in there versus a bigger track event like the Texas in particular. Always is quite the opposite, has much shorter entry lists, a few trucks showing up, and you get some start and park entries in there to kind of fill them out. But haven't seen the full picture of the 56 truck yet. It looks like they're going for a similar black and red motif with the white numbers on it. It looks just like the On Point Motorsports truck. So spotters might have a little bit of an issue with that at Martinsville, but I'm sure they'll work all that out, and hopefully they land a sponsor in the days ahead. Let's see. We're going to check here again. Whoop. Goodness me, it's just running a little slow here. There we are. Okay, we are now down to 1 hour and 22 minutes past the finish of the race. I basically started this time. I usually start the timer during the burnouts. Basically, there's not really a firm setup as to how long it takes, but that seems to be the good guide so far. It's been kind of on the higher end for a couple of these lately. Let's see. Excuse me. Hendrick Motorsports has certainly been off this year. We talk about Harvick being off. I mean, Harvick on an off day finishes 4th. Hendrick Motorsports on an off day, they got to hang on to a top 20. Seeing Jimmy Johnson finish 17th at a track where he won his first race is a little jarring, and didn't seem to really have much of a role in most of that event. Certainly Martinsville, I would think, would be one that they're going to look forward to. And it seems like you get to tracks like that where it comes down to just bare aggression. It seems like that's where, you talk about drivers aging and kind of developing more of a personality there. That seems to be Jimmy's angle there. I was very surprised at Watkins Glen last year how aggressive he was going into turn 1, just knifing under people, which is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get that line and get him out of there. But he was getting to the point where he would go side by side with somebody and the person would twitch and try to get out of the way. Ryan Blaney did that on at least one occasion there in that corner. And then, of course, the fact that he was throwing that car around at the Roval last year and basically, almost driving through Truex to try to win it. will the streak end in Martinsville next week? I mean, it's always a possibility, but boy, they have other than the clash, of course, and all the craziness that happened there. The ninth at the Daytona 500, the eighth at Phoenix. Those are their only finishes better than 17th all season. So an early year, it's you don't want to put dirt on this guy because he'll just dig his way back out again. But certainly I think the Hendrick Motorsports teams need to kind of work something out. Yep, you're right. You're right. And you mentioned, yeah, Bowman missing the duels, missing the 500 2015. I'd forgotten about that. You're right. You're right. That's when he had the Road Rippers car, if I remember correctly. Um, again, very rare though, very rare that Tony Baldwin doesn't make the 500. If you talk about 2009 with Scott Riggs, they got the Red Rocks Cafe sponsorship at the last second, got that car into the show. They were I think they were the last car to qualify in what was a huge entry list that year with a bunch of smaller teams came through. I remember really enjoying that week and just learning about these different programs that had sprung up. 2010, Mike Bliss drives that same car, not by choice, but because he wrecked his primary car, which is a Chevrolet, got wrecked in the Wednesday practice session. And I was talking about the benefits of the Wednesday practice session, how it always ramps up the drama a bit there. That car got wrecked, and then they got a new, had a Chevy body on their old Toyota car from 2009, got that car into the show. Unfortunately, had a wreck at the beginning of the 500. And then Dave Blaney getting into the show in 2011 without any sponsorship. Golden Corral comes on board. Blaney gets a good run in the duels, gets the car into the show, has a good run in the 500, which is ultimately ruined when he gets pulled off into the dirt during a pileup, trying to dodge it. Splitter digs in, rips the nose of the car out. He falls out of the race right then. And then 2012, who could forget what happened when the jet dryer exploded? And Dave Blaney is leading the race in the 36, which had again worked its way into the field, this time with full sponsorship from Ollie's Discount Market. Gets the car up there to the front of the field, is right where he needs to be in the middle of the pit cycle when the caution comes, and then the red flag. Race restarts, he falls back in the field, and it goes from there. And after that point, you have the alliance where they worked out the deal with Danica Patrick to try to get the run the number 7 after that, and Regan Smith had a great run at one point with them, it seems, and Elliott Sadler had tried to drive for him there. It's unfortunate that we're not really seeing more of Tommy Baldwin's team right now. That's another one that could potentially spring up at Bristol. I know that we'd seen J.J. Yaley do that before, although I think that was with Premium Motorsports when he was running the 7 last year. That was a premium car. It's always a shell game with this, trying to figure out who's where. But there was a time where, they would run Baldwin would run cars, even run their extra car. They had the start and park number 37 car. They'd run that at Bristol back when Mike Bliss was locking up the LASCAR championship a couple of years ago. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with going on with Hendrick or with Richard Petty Motorsports either. It's unfortunate to see Darrell Wallace struggling as much as he did. It seemed like last year they just had bad luck on one hand, but also just mechanical issues just everywhere, especially with brakes. Like, talk about the last thing that you want to have problems with your cars. If you can't stop these things, you're going to be in some real danger there. And I was very thankful that he didn't have any injuries from the accident he had at Pocono, and then a little while later at Indianapolis. It's kind of a crazy deal. Yes, that's right. Yeah, Yaley had the NY Racing Premium Motorsports collaboration because the Steakhouse Elite sponsorship. Still no news on that either. Too, the Jonathan Cohen operation there seems to be still tied with the Steakhouse Elite sponsorship, and we'd seen pictures, or at least a picture of number 7 in a Ford Mustang. Are they going to jump back in here? We'll see. They had last year jumped back into the circuit at Pocono, or no. I believe it was the Coca-Cola 600 before that, and then Pocono after that. Let me look that up. But yes, that's right. No, you're right, Matt Benedetto fan. That was the partnership they had along with Premium Motorsports to keep the number 7 car out there. And it's interesting. You had the NY Racing team spring back and forth between the 7 and then later the 23 at the end of the year. And they had investment along with the Obica team and the assets of the number 23 team. And now we really don't know what's going on with any of that. No news on that front either, but we'll find out. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but let's see here. Yeah, the 600. I know there was that one race that I think it was at Pocono last year where they had fielded the seven. The Jonathan Cohen had fielded the number 7 car with I believe it was Sorensen in it, and then they withdrew it, and then they re-entered it under Premium Motorsports. So it's basically the same car and the same team and everything like that, but it was entered under a different owner. So it's weird. It's both withdrawn and entered in the race. Yeah, Yaley ran the Jonathan Cohen Steakhouse Elite car at the Coca-Cola 600, started 40th, finished 38th. Yeah, and that was the first run for the 7 since Danica's run with Premium Motorsports strictly in the Daytona 500 that year as part of the Danica Double. And then, yeah, I believe should have been the next one. Yeah, Pocono was the one where, yeah, Cohen withdrew the number 7 and then was re-entered under Premium Motorsports. And that was pretty much where the arrangement stood for a while there until Cohen came back in the picture there. Yeah. It's yeah. I know that there was the Kaufman statement about devaluing the sport to have these open teams out there. I mean, I don't get why if they want if it's not enough already that they're running slower cars and they're just trying to get their equipment together. Oh, we are at any moment now. We wait for a call on the inspection queue. Nothing new yet. That's just showing that the 90 minutes has elapsed. So we're still waiting for any results on that. But yeah, I always team of pyramid scream. I don't know. Again, I don't know any new information about the 7 team or anything like that. I'm just as curious as the rest of you. But hopefully we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. It's definitely an unusual situation. But as to what's gonna happen on that, hopefully we'll find out pretty soon. If not, I'd say, excuse me, I'd say Pocono would probably be the next part that I would look at, or the Coca-Cola 600 if last year is a template that we're going off of. Although it'd certainly be interesting if uh, the Sonoma Raceway ended up being the place they come back. I know Yaley, not really known as being a road racer or anything like that, but it seems like he always seems to make time to actually compete at the Sonoma Raceway, whether it was for Dusty Whitney's team or BK Racing and things of that nature. I'm just looking on my feed here. Pockrass just posted a video that Austin Dillon was released from the infield care center. He walked to a car to go to the care center after the race. So it looks like he was treated and released. So that's certainly good news. Hopefully he's going to spend some time kind of recovering there as he gets ready for Martinsville next week. Again, no new news at the moment. We are at, I don't know, last con 5 or whatever you can call it now, as we wait for potential results from NASCAR inspection. Still no results yet at the moment. So we're still waiting on here. In the meantime, I'll be happy to answer any of your other questions about what happened this week. As was posted earlier, we do have the Xfinity article on Cesar Vaccarella posted up here. Excellent pictures, by the way. I have to definitely give a shout out here to both Brian Nolan and Cindy Yen, who were both had the presence of mind to take some very excellent pictures of the 90 car backup car in the garage area at the Auto Club Speedway there. Those were both used in there. Made sure to credit the both of them. So hopefully that gets them some more traffic, and you can check out their other work on Twitter. Great. The pictures aspect of this, I thought about doing different things with that, but I thought about maybe doing some graphics or something similar to the starting grids for those to kind of standardize it. But I think people really like the pictures of the cars because then people can actually look for what they look like and then maybe see them the next week. And then especially when you get to a race like this where they're running a backup car from another team, you really do want to see what they actually look like. You don't want some artist rendering of what's going on. Yeah, very happy with the pictures collected there. Hopefully we get to the point here with the website that we start covering races a bit more frequently here and getting more coverage, and then you can get this straight from the source here, and we can do that. I've also been thinking about going forward how to handle the disqualification show for races where I'm covering it at the track. I'm sure nobody in the media center is going to want me sitting there blathering on here with my my webcam in front of me. I know they have rooms for like radio and podcast people and stuff like that. So I guess I'll work something out with that. We'll see what happens at Sonoma going forward. That's kind of one that we're looking at. Nothing confirmed, of course. Everything's subject to change, but that's certainly the first one that we're actively looking at to cover this year in person. And hopefully, most sport in the August for the Truck Series, and then looking at both the Texas and Phoenix double in November. That will probably be our 2019 schedule, subject to change with things with the Patreon and everything from there. Still working on all of that. Let's see here. Any other? Let's look at the Xfinity results again here. I'm sure I'm overlooking somebody, and I want to kind of cover my bases here as best as possible. Um, Kind of going back in the meantime while I'm pulling this up here. I know I posted this a while back. The qualifying procedure in the Cup Series, it reminded me very much of back when I was covering the World Touring Car Championship at the Sonoma Raceway a few years ago, doing my research for it, looking at a similar issue they had at the Salzburg Ring, which is a very bizarre road course. It's a beautiful location. I mean, they basically just have to get like the tightest, longest, narrowest track up there. It's almost like somebody took an oval and just sat on it. It's like crunched together like a paper clip. So it has these really long straightaways on it. And these touring cars that were running at the time, were very underpowered. I mean, some were, more so than others. The BMW seemed to really struggle a lot, compared to some of the Chevrolet teams and stuff back then. And they had an issue where, again, they were waiting until the time was running out, and people trying to lag back behind other people to get a run on them and get the best run they could. And then whoever basically was front of that line, they were in the worst position because they weren't going to be as fast as anybody behind them. And the video is on my Twitter feed here. Let me see if I can find that link there again and post that up. But yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, Morgan Shepherd doing the same thing in the number 40 on the side of his car, Watkins Glen. That wasn't my picture. I think that wasn't the year that I went to the track. That was somebody else that was covering that. Let me see if I can get the credit for that picture there while I'm also looking up that. Because yeah, I went to Watkins Glen last year. We had some interesting. Certainly, the promotion for the book was a big part of that, but also the looking at what happened here. Oh, that's right. That was during Jeff Green's last place streak. Okay, not Bristol. It was before that. So we moved back here a little bit. At Ohio, no. Yeah, Jeff Green getting 7 straight. There we go. Yeah, Elvis on Fire posted that at the Rubbins Racing forums there, and that's always the kind of thing that's interesting to see. And maybe they don't have a car ready, or they use a car from another team. They just change the numbers up as best they can. Shepard was lone DNQ for that Watkins Glen race, and then got that in there. So here we go. Let me get that. I'll get that link back there for you. I'm sure you're already looking at it, but there you go. Car, boom, here. And yeah, those are always the stories that are interesting. Actually, again, looking at it again, it's interesting seeing all the little smaller sponsors that you can get on those cars there, and the different local brands. Like they get the hotel that they're staying in, or their hotel that's just supporting them, or some smaller company like a mom and pop shop or something that's just trying to get a little bit of extra advertising out there. It's cool to see them support a lot of these teams. Let's take a look here. Okay, still no call yet. Pockrass just posted the message on here. Really thankful for all the NASCAR infield care center staff. They definitely helped me finish that race. Some type of flu hit me bad. The adrenaline has worn off. The pain is setting in. It was worth our first top 10 of the year. Good job to the 3 team. So Dylan, again, recuperating after driving through apparently a similar illness to what ailed Keselowski back in Atlanta a couple weeks ago. And as you mentioned, his first top 10 of the season. So a good effort for him. Yeah, inspection's taking a good while this week. We are well past the original mark here for the results. So we'll stay on here and try to get, we're expecting the results any minute now to find out what had happened. Let's look back here. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I was going to pull up that touring car clip. Where was that? NASCAR and the Twitter. There we go. I was just posting another link to the Austin Dillon tweets, the original one there. That's getting its traffic already so far. Dude. It's good to see a good group of fans there out and supporting Daniel Suarez. I know that, especially after what happened at the ISM Raceway, I imagine his fan support is getting much larger than it was before. And I got to say, also speaking of fans, I really like that 5 wide salute at the start of the race. Doesn't I don't know how I portray myself, but I don't. It doesn't take. It doesn't take. It doesn't take too much to really impress me. So it's that. I thought that was really cool. I thought that was really impressive when they did like the 5 wide deal there, and just how showing off the width of the track, of course, on top of just doing the fan salute there, doing that one better. So that was pretty neat. Um, let's see. It's good to see Bailey Curry back out there in the number 17 there. I know they only had like a bottom 5 in the finish of the race there, but it was certainly the best that they could accomplish, I guess, after repairing the car. It seemed like they had a very bad hit there at the ISM Raceway and tore up the right side of Curry's number 17. But the Rick Ware team, never said die. They got the car back out there. In fact, put the Jacob Companies logos on there. Jacob Companies, both the primary sponsorship for the number 51 that Ware's team runs in the Cup Series, as well as a major sponsorship deal for Cole Custer's efforts in the Xfinity Series. You want to talk about a team like sponsorship like IK9, the old Jacob Company has been getting a good deal of exposure this year. So that's good to see. Let's see. I'm going to post a link to that tweet about the qualifying issue video. This is part of a longer video that I believe that was the one that Tom Coronel posted on his channel. So it's got a little bit of editing and sound editing in there. I queued it up to the spot in the video where they actually showed the cars kind of driving around at about 5 miles an hour. It does look it reminded me immediately of that from what was happening with Austin Dillon and everybody else on Friday. So it just shows that it's an international issue, not just here. And again, they have multiple rounds and time segments, and so perhaps it's something just endemic of what has to be done there. But again, single car qualifying, I think that would solve a lot of issues there. But will it happen? Who knows? So let's see. Levi Garrett sponsorship. Look at it. Great pictures of Ricky Rudd winning at Watkins Glen in 1990. Yeah, definitely ready for road course racing. I know that's interesting over here. I don't know if they're nationally played. Probably not. Probably just played here and locally here at least. But they're playing the ads for the Sonoma Raceway coming up, and of course the 50th anniversary of the track, bringing back the carousel. It's going to be really interesting. I'm keeping my ear out to see if there's going to be any issues with any tire tests or anything like that. If there is, I'm going to certainly aim to attend those as well and get you guys some more coverage from that, because the carousel is going to be, I think, its potential to have some really interesting situation. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we have a call. Bob Pockris posted just 1 minute ago. Cup Tech is done. No issues except one lug nut missing on the Hamlin car. Kyle Busch is your winner at the Auto Club Speedway. And that is the end of the tweet there. Kyle Busch is your winner of the race today at the Auto Club Speedway of Southern California, which means he does now have 200 combined wins across NASCAR's top 3 series. So that is settled. In addition, here in the second tweet here, Kurt Busch and Keselowski cars to R&D for evaluation. But that is so NASCAR can look and determine any trends, not for penalties. At least that's the official statement. So Kurt Busch and Keselowski's cars to R&D. Hamlin has 1 lug nut missing on the car. Kyle Busch, your winner today at the Auto Club Speedway. So Kyle Busch, congratulations to him. Clint Boyer, your last place finisher. The last car feature on Boyer will come later tonight. The Xfinity Series article is already posted. So that's the story for this week. Does Penske still own Auto Club Speedway? That's a good question, actually. I know that the old logo used to have the Penske graphic on it with the checkered flag and all that, but I know they've changed the branding so many times. I'm sure they still have some stake in it. If not, they outright own it. I'm sure there's still some investment that they have in it, and certainly a level of pride that comes with Keselowski and Logano and Blaney, for that matter, not to forget about him, running as competitively as they can at the track. Actually, just occurred to me that's probably why they look so disappointed as they were that Kyle Busch beat them there. But yes. So for those of you just coming in here, Kyle Busch officially your winner today at the Auto Club Speedway of Southern California. There is no disqualification again. So we roll on again on the disqualification watch for Martinsville next Sunday. So the Truck Series, the Cup Series, stay tuned on that. And again, it's interesting. It's interesting in there. Uh, well, there you go. Hey, I'm not gonna. I have no concerns on trolling or anything there, Beast. Beast of Metal 1989. So it's gonna be a media onslaught here about the whole Kyle Busch thing. It's already it's very the green on my Twitter feed is not just from St. Patrick's Day. It's all shots of that Interstate Batteries car. But he's the winner, so he's got it. Apparently, no technical infractions on that. And Clint Boyer again, your last place finisher today. So. Until next week, again, thank you for tuning in. It's been the disqualification show for Fontana. Tune in next week for Martinsville and this Thursday on lastcard.info for our weekend preview for the Truck Series and the Cup Series. And, of course, by next week for our Martinsville features after that. Until then, thank you for tuning in.